Hey y'all, Zelda here. I am going to talk today about rhythms and finding your flow, specifically through the lens of how different neurotypes, like being neurodivergent, can really ask that we find our own rhythm and way of moving through life, particularly as it relates to burnout. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that rhythm and flow relates to two of these archetypes in the tarot. One is the eights, so the eights in different suits, including the eight of the major arcana, which is the strength, as well as the knights or the explorer in the deck that I use, which is the numinous tarot deck. So specifically using that kind of language, I'm going to first talk a little bit about what I mean by this and how that shows up in my own life, and then I'm going to move into talking about it through the language of the tarot. So if that sounds interesting, stick around. If not, I'll see you at the next video. Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about how my own nervous system relates to burnout. As an autistic, ADHD, CPTSD, like neuroqueer person in the world, and also as someone who identifies as being like highly sensitive, and that is a very important part of the work I do as a therapist and as a spiritual worker in the world, I find that being able to honor my own rhythms is a fundamental, like a crucial crux of how I manage and engage with burnout. One of the ways in which this shows up is the kind of rhythm of how I produce and engage with productivity or kind of external client facing work, as well as other forms of work. Also, the rhythm of my day supports me in making contact with different things that I need, but also the way that I engage with rhythm, even just, I think about this because my training is in dance movement therapy, and I think of, the way that I move, and that neurodivergent folks sometimes move, they dance to the beat of a different drum or walk to the beat of a different drum, so to speak, or there even is these times in my life. Like, one of the things that my mom said to me when I was younger, I loved dancing. I was on a dance team, and my mom said that I reminded her of a horse. I remember because I was very offended when she said this, but I do think that it was actually spot on. Is that I reminded her of a horse because I was like really graceful in a lot of ways, but then also I was like very like awkward and like gangly almost, or like clumsy in certain ways too. And then I remember when I was living in Chile that someone who I was dancing with, I found partner dancing to be really difficult. I couldn't like hear the rhythm as easily, and I require a lot of like explicit instruction. I'm a very good student, but I prefer explicit instruction rather than just like, I'll show you, let's just move to the beat. Like, that makes me very anxious in like dancing type of situations. And I remember that someone told me, it sounds like you're very good at dancing, but it looks like you're dancing to a part of the song that nobody else is listening to, which means that if you look at me, maybe sometimes I'm like misattuned. And I feel like my rhythms in life are very much like that too. That like what rhythms work for other people might not really actually work for me. And I think that this is true for a lot of people. And if you think about things like curating or finding a flow state, which in research is very much about when you're in this kind of timeless, very present state, that it's been studied a lot in extreme athletes, where people are just not like overthinking things, and they like are completely present in the moment, and like time goes away. And that kind of flow state is also very present for folks who are in creative work. And I very much relate to finding a flow state, whether it's when I'm with clients or in spiritual work. It almost feels very similar to like a trance state for me, where I am incredibly present. I'm not like cognitively overthinking things. I'm actually just in a fully receptive and in the engaging space. When I'm writing or when I'm creating something or when I'm reading, a lot of times what will happen is afterwards, I won't really remember exactly how I did it, right? Like I'll remember, sometimes I will remember more or less if it's in the spiritual context of things. Sometimes in like creating, I'll read it and it's almost like someone else wrote it. Like I'll remember the process, but I'm not like thinking and crafting and putting each word where it belongs, or I'm not, that kind of thing. And so I think that curating a rhythm for our life and for our day that allows for these flow states to come up is also part of how we don't like muscle through our life and how we go with our own flow and our own rhythm. One of the things that I find really helpful when I am experiencing burnout is moving into like more of a rest-based routine where I am really focused on getting back into things that are really like nourishing and filling up my cup and are not super demanding on me. And that feels super crucial to honoring my rhythms that are more natural to my nervous system. Part of this is how I structure my workday. I don't prefer working in the mornings. I like to do things and get up in the morning, but I like if I struggle with sleep, which I sometimes do when I burned out, struggle to get to sleep at a like reasonable hour. I like to be able to sleep and get up and do things that are nourishing and fulfilling for my specific rhythms. For instance, that involves getting up, making contact with my good spirits, bringing things to my altar, going for a walk with my dog, preparing for my day in a way that is very mindful. I usually spend some time reading or writing in the mornings, listening to an audiobook, things that are very restorative, and eating and getting my food and everything ready for the day, which takes a lot of active effort on my part. I think that a big part that can inhibit us from being able to find our own flow and our own rhythm is having a lot of assumptions about what that rhythm should look like. Now, this is one of the things that I think is like initially very much a part of how the eights relate to rhythm and finding our flow, is that in the Eight of Swords, which is the Eight of Bells in this deck, there is this sense of torment around our narrative thought process and how we feel affected by others. Now, I just want to pause before I keep going. I am not in any way insinuating that this is how you should always read this card in the tarot. I think that not always does this card mean anything about neurodivergent rhythms. The eights don't always speak about that, but I am using that as a lens to discuss this topic and how it's almost like there's this and there's this topic, and now we're talking about the space in between so that we can better triangulate meaning and understand them in a different way. And that is what I'm using to discuss this. And I do think that when we are really caught up in this idea of what we should be like, what our day should be like. For example, I really have always admired people who can get up really early, do their writing practice right away, and then move into their day, and that's something, a rhythm that just always works for them. And realistically, if I do that without tending to the other things and the other needs that I experience, I am going to burn out. I cannot do that at the expense of all other things in my life. It's not realistic. I experience, when I don't honor my rhythms, burnout that results in chronic health disruption and feeling really like a lot of body pain, a lot of panic and anxiety and flares in other types of ways, increase in sensory sensitivity. And so there is just some realistic aspect of like honoring these rhythms promotes health and wellness along the way, right? Your rhythm is going to be a rhythm in which you feel actually good, and it's adjustable enough that you can like honor your needs. So I do think this one to me really speaks of not getting caught up in the demand of the rhythms of the world, like the more predominant rhythms of the world, where like a 9 to 5, which honestly, I think this is one of the main reasons that a lot of neurodivergent people are not like able to be steadily employed. Part of that is just like the expectations and having an ableist society And there is obviously such a spectrum and a range of why this is. So I don't want to like make too many claims about this. But one thing that I see in my work with neurodivergent folks, especially autistic folks, is that the like consistent work schedule of like 9 to 5, having to be there 5 days a week, it just does not work for their rhythms. They are not able to be there. And when they're there, they are so on or so engaged that they're not taking care of their natural rhythms because that's not what they see modeled or expected from them. And sometimes that even means like the rhythm of being able to like sit in a position that you need and like accommodating yourself. Like I work for myself, I work in my own space, which means that in between things, I can get up, I can move around, I can schedule people at a time that works for me, right? There's a lot of things that I can accommodate myself with. I also have shifted my rhythm of I have 3 weeks clinically on and then 1 week clinically off, meaning that even though sometimes I work, I don't see clients most of the time that week, or I see a lot fewer clients. And I do that because I can't necessarily like keep up with doing notes and therapy at exactly the same time. So there's just this sense of like, how do you kind of stagger your working, your movement, those types of things, and not being like assuming what you need to do feels like a really big part of that. Now, another part is the Eight of Cups. Now, the Eight of Cups is often about, you can see this person walking away from something. And I do think that sometimes in finding our own rhythms, we need to recognize what we need to let go of. There are some rhythms that I think we do that are to kind of like maintain expectations, or sometimes there are people who our rhythms don't resonate with. Sometimes we need to release certain aspects. You know, I know that my rhythm had a very hard time finding its flow when I was engaging with certain substances in certain ways that really affected my rhythms. When I was engaging with certain practices, that would be really disruptive. And I realized that, like, for instance, something that isn't substance, there's no like stigma attached to it. I love going to dance classes, but I feel like the commute of getting to a dance studio is so difficult and honestly very prohibitive. And in order to find something that was a way that I could move my body, I had to release and let go of the idea that I should be doing that in a dance studio, right? As soon as I let go of that idea, I became more curious and I started looking at like online things and doing videos and things like that. And as soon as I kind of like accepted that that wasn't going to happen, a lot more options opened up to me and it felt like a lot more at peace. Similarly to saying no, like there are certain nights of the week where I don't go and hang out with people because I cannot do that in the rhythm of my week. It takes me a lot of energy during my work days. I cannot also be expected to be social on those days. It's just something that I do not have energy or capacity for. I know that when people become parents, a lot of times their rhythms change and they have to walk away from certain things so that they can, open up to other areas. And I just think this is really beautiful to acknowledge that there is like a grief sometimes in letting go of certain parts of our rhythm, like in healing from burnout, letting go of my morning writing routine, which hopefully is not a forever thing, but that was really crucial for me to be able to come back to myself and honor what I needed in the moment. And as soon as I was able to do that, I felt a lot more content. Okay, let's do the Eight of Candles. This is the Eight of Wands in other decks. And this card often has to do with pacing. To me, this is like trusting a fast-pacing creative. And to me, it also has a lot of energy, almost like the magician or something, where there's just this like channeling. And to me, that is like trusting your efficiency window and not judging that. Like if you are someone, I have a client who is very productive late at night. And honestly, because of the way that their life is set up, they are able to be productive at that time. And this to me feels like leaning into that transformative power of when you are creative and aligned, and trusting the like follow through of your body to be able to show up for that, and letting the rest of your routine be structured around that. It's also about trusting that kind of ebb and flow of that, so that even though you kind of like lean in and trust the fire of it, you don't burn out. right? And I just think that also is like, you don't want to burn the candle at both ends. You want to kind of move from flame to flame and allow that flame to have its full sequence, but not to like push it and demand that it go past its life cycle or its timeliness, so to speak. And I think that's super important in this card too, for what we're talking about, like I said. And then finally, the 8 is the 8 of tomes, or the 8 of pentacles. And this one feels like a sense of pacing on the other end of the spectrum, in the sense of there's a slowness, a patientness, a diligentness. And to me, this really has been a way that I engage with the tinkering of my rhythm and of my daily routine, is that for me, my daily routine, my daily rhythms are a constant conversation with my needs in the present moment. So I take full authority to be able to change. And this is something I feel really challenged by, because once we have things settled, it can feel like, oh, what, we're just going to change everything and then we have to tell other people about it, or we have to update people about how we're doing. And like, yeah, that is what I'm saying. And I am challenging myself to do that as well. That like, if something in my routine and my rhythm is not sustainable and not working, I want to adjust that and be devoted to coming back to the process of allowing transitions to be there, of allowing things to shift when they need to shift, of asking for more time around things that I need more time around being patient with my own process. When I need to shift into a rest, I am in one of my rest weeks right now, where I am catching up on a lot of admin work. And one of the things that I have really needed is to have a lot of slowness, I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks and like playing a silly little game to let my brain decompress, going for long walks. And I am not necessarily doing the work in a way that feels efficient, which is a value of mine with my work, especially boring work. I'd rather like get it done with, but I need to be patient and moderate with how I engage with it, because I just do not have the same amount of spoons. And I think that anyone who has experienced chronic health challenges where they just or is neurodivergent in a way where they've struggled with neurodivergent burnout, sometimes we need to just honor not having the same pacing that we do at other times in our life. And to me, this kind of constant conversation and honoring of my process is a way that I respect myself and respect my own boundaries, and I'm in communication with especially my body. You know, with it being the 8 of Pentacles, there is this sense of like embodiedness and earthliness, where I acknowledge that this is, you know, earthly things do have limitations and structure, and that is actually not a bad thing. That is a very beautiful, can be a very Venusian, you know, gorgeous thing, if honored. And if not, can be a very like dug in, confining feeling thing. In the conversation of strength, which is the 8 in the major arcana, I really think this is very similar in a sense of self-respect, and having the courage to acknowledge our wants and needs can be a very potent and powerful way that we honor and engage with the different tools that we need to utilize at different times. For instance, sometimes if I need more health related things, I have to shift the routine of my work life and my social life and all the rest of my life to accommodate that. I can't not go to medical appointments that I need. That's a drastic shift. Anyone who's going to lots of medical appointments understands how drastically this adjusts your rhythms. But honoring that those are the new kind of like spokes of the wheel, so to speak, allows you to build other things right into that. If I go to a medical appointment, sometimes I need like a self-care treat afterwards. And sometimes that means like having space after that to sit in a park or go for a walk or journal or whatever it is, right? Or get boba sometimes, right? Like these types of things. Knowing that it can't always look like any self-care. This is not about it being like inaccessible if you don't have lots of resources to do that. But I think there's like a tenderness that allows the power to come through, that a tenderness to our needs and to our strengths allows that strength and that power to actually shine and come through, that sense of capacity. So the other things, I guess the nights. I'm not going to necessarily go through each of them in depth, but I think that these are different seasons or different types of pacing to our rhythm. Sometimes I am in a season, and sometimes it is associated with the actual seasons, and sometimes it is just a season in life where I feel like there is a quality of preparation. Sometimes I am not in a super productive place, but I am like working on something. Often this is about routines that are more about devotion than they are about productivity or seeing a direct outcome. A lot of my spiritual discipline and routines and rituals and rhythms come in what I would say this category is. I'm not often doing like that's just not part of my personal practice where I'm always like doing a lot of active spell work. I do have a lot of active, consistent daily routines, engaging with my ancestors, tending to my altars, and being in conversation with my good spirits and with the nature spirits of my community, engaging with things like tarot and divination to support my work that I do with clients. Like to me, that is like slow, gradual. Sometimes there are moments of insight that leap into a different season, but a lot of those things are like careful, metered, not about, they're the preparation aspect. And I think the Knight of Swords or the Knight of Pentacles, the Explorer of Tomes in this deck, is very much about that like metered, consistent rhythm. It is the slowest of the movement cards. In terms of the Knight of Cups or the Explorer of Vials in this deck, I think about the emotionally guided, like how I tend to the rhythms and needs of my heart, how I build things like connection into my rhythms, how my rhythms connect and flow with the other people in my life. For instance, I love a repeated hangout. I have a person that when I go to acupuncture, I go on a walk with this person a lot of times, and that feels like very much being in the flow of like finding a flow in relationship with other people. I have ways in which my spouse and I have, mutuality with our rhythms. My mom and I have a phone call every week. My sister and I have a phone call. There are ways in which I find things that are mutually supportive, ways that our rhythms can sync up in relationship with others. And to me, that speaks a lot to this kind of season and like the relationality and emotionality of our rhythms and flows. The Knight of Wands, the Explorer of Candles in this deck. To me, this is very creative, fiery. Sometimes that also can be in relationship with being okay with a quicker rhythm. Some seasons of life are faster. Sometimes I have a lot more demands, and this is about knowing and trusting when I have the capacity for that. I'm not going to like enforce a rest-based rhythm if I don't need that as much, but I am going to honor that I cannot keep up that pacing forever. There's like a temporality to it. I think of it as like a candle burning down. You cannot keep burning once it is burned out, right? And I just think of that of like letting something have its life cycle and trusting that creative process, and then allowing there to be like almost an extinguishing of that flame before something else is reignited. This also feels like, as I'm saying that, and this is not necessarily about the card, but I do try to honor the different life cycles of different projects, like honoring that my energy on a daily basis is finite, and that if I am moving something heavily on a specific project, like right now I'm focusing on admin, I am not demanding and asking a lot of myself in these other areas. That's personal for me. It's hard for me to split my focus in that way, and when I do that, I kind of set myself up for failure because I have so many expectations on what I should be doing. So I have a lot of other maintenance things that kind of support me in being in my flow while I can focus on those creative projects and build those almost like into slots, like slots of where my productive energy, however big or small that is, whether that's on a daily or weekly basis, where that can slot in. Another fast-paced season is the Knight of Swords, the Explorer of Bells in this deck. And this feels very much like it is air and air, so it is very, very swift. Sometimes this just feels like we are soaring through. And to me, I love when I am just in a flow, accomplishing a lot, part of the way that I got burned out in the first place is just mentally, I always have these really big goals and dreams for what I'm going to accomplish. And realistically, for me, pacing has been a big part of figuring out how to manage burnout in my life, and being able to see very clearly about what my needs are and how to make that enjoyable for myself. Because that's one of the things that fundamentally I think about neurodivergent rhythms is that the right rhythm for you are going to love. It is going to be a beat that you love dancing to. I'm not saying you're going to love every single minute of your life, but if you are at all like I was when I was extremely burnt out and struggling to keep up in my life, I constantly felt like I was falling behind, like I was coming up short, like I was unable to handle the kind of like avalanche of things. Like I was constantly scrambling. I think that a lot of times people feel like if they do not keep up, they will not be like kind of supported by the pacing of their life. And I think that's so valid. Our culture is so fast paced. Living in capitalism like doesn't sleep. But that is not genuine in terms of the world that we live in. Like capitalism is not the definition of our culture. Like there is also the like culture, the collective of nature, of other nervous systems. Nature has its seasons, right? In summer, things are always producing, sometimes even overproducing, right? In fall, things are dying, things are composting. In winter, things are sleeping. In spring, things are budding and waking up. There's all sorts of these different rhythms and different seasons in nature that can be mirrored. There are different life cycles of things, slowing down that can come in older age. So in all of this, I think there's a sense of like trusting that there are going to be seasons where things are really fast paced and not getting swept away by that, right? Like that to me is like both trusting the pacing. In this card, I feel like, at least when I pull this, often there is both a swiftness but also a capacity. I don't see this as like, oh, you need to slow down. When I pull this card, I'm like, okay, I can keep up. And so I do think there's trusting that sometimes we are capable of more than we believe. Right? Sometimes we are capable of soaring through things, of accomplishing so much more than we expected. But if we expect that all the time of ourselves, then when there is a genuine increase in pacing, sometimes we do not have the energy or the stamina to keep up with it. And for me, having an honoring of these different seasons, of the different pacing, me having a rest-based routine allows that when I have more creative energy and more creative fuel, I shift into a different type of that, right? When I'm more burned out, I need more of certain things. When I'm less burned out, I don't, right? When I'm in more chronic pain, I can't work out as much. But when I'm not in as much chronic pain, I actually really love working out. I love dancing. I love moving my body. And it's taken me a long time to get to a point where I can have the both and of both of those things while being in balance. So I think that's where I'm going to pause today. I feel as if I could talk about this for a very long time, but I am curious what you notice about yourself, about your own rhythm, about how you structure your day. When do you like to rest? When do you feel productive? What does like an ideal rhythm of a day, of a week, of a month, of a year look like for you? I will say I just said a year, but I do think that's a very big window. I think much more realistic to think of maybe a month as the longest time frame, because these larger cycles I think we can only really see when we zoom out in the big picture. I'm not a big yearly like New Year's resolution type of person, despite loving doing an envisioning process. I think that when we kind of break it down, those bigger picture goals need to be kind of like slotted into our daily, weekly, monthly types of rhythms. But especially for folks who menstruate, I do think there's a lot of ways to honor our monthly rhythms, and that's a totally different concept and video. So yes, what do you know about your own rhythms? Have you ever thought about the kind of tarot cards that we talked about in this way? I'd love to hear your comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end if you chose to do that. And many blessings. I'll see you next time.